let me get back on track with this. Where were you when the planes hit?
Yeah, so everybody has, you know, kind of their story. So at the time, and you showed the picture of me diving, I was head of the New York FBI dive team, and it was the only dive team in the FBI at the time. And there's just the thing. You see that tattoo. So that tattoo, if I can show it here, is that's 9/11. So if you see, those are the towers. There's the Pentagon. This is the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania. So this is my story of my day. At the top, I have the NYPD, FDNY, PAPD, FBI. I have all of those. I have Lenny Hatton's initials, John O'Neill's initials. So and I can tell a story about how this came about. But so on 9/11, about a month before, I flew out to Michigan because the Michigan State Police dive team needed our assistance because the FBI dive team, we had trained them in some equipment, and we had some equipment they didn't have, and it was a particular job. So I went out to Michigan. I did a site survey about what we were going to need. Came back. We were deploying the week of September 10th to Michigan to do this dive job. Usually takes a week or two, and 8 or 10 of us fly out there, my team. So I'm the team leader. So I'm going on the early morning flight out of Newark with 3 of my divers. The rest of the team's coming on a later flight, commercial flight, later in the day. We're all going to gather in Michigan, Traverse City, Michigan, and do the job. So I'm sitting in Newark on United Flight 91 from Newark to Chicago. We're going to connect from Chicago to Traverse City. We're taking off out of Newark on the morning of 9/11. Beautiful day. 4 armed FBI agents on the plane. I'm looking out the window, my window seat, that beautiful view of Manhattan, and the towers were always, you know, the towers were built in the early 70s, and I used to watch them. My dad had a picture of them on his desk at home. And I'm looking at them, and I see the first plane hit the North Tower from my window seat on my United flight.
Wow.
We're just climbing out of Newark, northbound. And we bank left because we're on our way to Chicago. And about 10 minutes into the flight, I'm listening to, I think it was Channel 9 on the United Audio used to give you the pilots kind of, you could hear. And I could hear the pilots talking, and I could tell there was something wrong. At the time, when I saw the plane hit, I just saw like a flash and some spark, which I later learned was probably glass falling and glistening. I didn't know exactly what I had seen, but I turned to my seat and I looked behind me because I had a colleague sitting about 3 rows back, and he was on a window side. We were 4, everybody armed on the plane always has to know where everybody else is sitting, right? That's the airline rules and stuff. So I looked at him, and he just shrugged his shoulders because he had seen the same thing. We're like, we didn't know quite what it was, but there was an explosion and something looked like it hit. Now, you know, we all remember the small plane that went into the Empire State Building years ago and stuff. As New Yorkers, you kind of, you know the lore, and so you say, oh my God, this has been a terrible accident. And then less than halfway into the flight, just a couple, maybe 15 minutes later, the co-pilot, the female co-pilot, comes out of the cockpit, and she motions for the 4 of us to meet her in the back alley. And again, Tuesday morning, empty planes. That's why they chose all the flights on Tuesday morning. And the last 10 rows, there was nobody in the last 10 rows. So we got in the back alley, and she said, the co-pilot said, look, 2 planes have been flown into the Twin Towers. There are 24 planes hijacked. At this time, remember, we're in the air. This is only minutes. So all the misinformation is happening. So there's a bunch of planes not responding. You can see, if you look at that on the graphic you're showing now, you can see like United Flight 93, right? That's the same flight path I was on United 91, because if you continue that plane and it doesn't turn around, it goes right over Chicago. United 93 was going to San Francisco. So they take the same flight path as United to Chicago would. And it's the same plane as a 757. So our pilots were in the pilot's lounge at Newark that morning with the United 93 pilots. So she tells us, you know, it's Armageddon. She tells us there's planes hijacked all over the country. You know, they're flying them into buildings and everything. So, you know, we're way up here now, and we're 4 armed FBI agents. So put one of my guys outside the cockpit. I go into the cockpit to talk to the captain with the co-pilot. She takes her seat, and I can hear him trying to raise United 93 because we're supposed to be one behind them in the flight path. And yeah, that line right there, we're right behind them. We're the nearest one to them. So I think it's Cleveland Center was telling our captain to try to raise them point to point because they should be right in front of you. And I said, well, to the co-pilot, he's the pilot is talking to on the radio. She's talking to me. And I said, where are they? She goes, we don't know. I said, well, how is that? Why don't you know? And she goes, they turned their transponder off. And I said, why would they do that? And the pilot must have been hearing us through one, out the other ear. And he kind of snapped back. He said, they wouldn't, like really, like emphatically. I'm like, well, okay. And then I look back at her. I said, you told me they turned the transponder off. And he just barked at me that they wouldn't. I was, what does that mean? And she goes, and at that point, I could see her eyes welling up a little bit. And she goes, that means they're not flying that plane. Wow. And every pilot knew from the 70s when we had all of those hijackings, the pilots were told, don't give up control of the aircraft. Take them wherever they want to go. They want to go to Cuba. They want to go to Angola. Take them where they want to go. Get the plane on the ground, secure the passengers, and we'll negotiate the release. Don't worry. How many people you think die? And because we now know both towers collapsed and we're listening to the radio. And I think of the four of us, three of it were native New Yorkers and one had lived in New York for a long time. And I think the lowest estimate was 10,000 people. I mean, I think I said probably 22,000 people based on the PATH train, based on the amount of people that worked in those towers and all that stuff. And so, it's tragic, but it could have been orders of magnitude more people could have died if it wasn't evacuated. Thank God, NYPD and FDNY are the best in the world at responding to mass. I mean, this isn't the first big event, the biggest, but it wasn't the first big event, right? We've had big events, and just Times Square on New Year's Eve. Like the city handled big things, and I think that if you look at what happened, and you look at the heroes that responded. Man, there was no hesitation. There was no, what do we do? There was boom, boom, boom. Do this, do that, do this. And all of that action, of course, many of those people lost their lives in the collapse, but all of that action saved so many lives. So many more people would have died. And like I said, the minimal estimate of the four of us was 10,000. I think the maximum was like 30,000. So I think people should realize many, many, many more people would have lost their lives that day if not for the quick action and cool, calm collectiveness of the New York City responders that just did their job, most of whom lost their lives, and just did what they do. They stayed calm. They responded to this enormous event with professionalism, and I think they saved tens of thousands of lives doing that.
I think, Bobby, I think you're right. One of the reasons, one of my favorite pictures from 9/11 shows 4 NYPD cops going towards the towers and other people running. And it said, while others ran away, we ran toward the towers. And that said everything.
Yeah.
That one flyer.
And the agent that we lost, Lenny Hatton, who lived in Jersey, he was a volunteer fireman in his town in Jersey. He went into fireman mode. And the FBI isn't trained to do this, right? So I think the reason he made several trips down into the mall, helping people up through the smoke, and he kept going back. And we found witnesses who identified him as the guy that helped them out. He made several trips down, and unfortunately, on one of them is when the collapse, he was down underneath. When I went to Lenny's funeral and we did the drive-by of his house, he had 5 kids, and I could hear them crying. And they all came out on the steps. And when we drove by, his turnout gear was at the end of his driveway. His boots, his coat, his big fireman coat, his big fireman helmet. And I tell you, it was there wasn't a dry eye in this procession as we all drove by his house and paid tribute to him. And it was in large part because he was a fireman, because he had that run towards danger, help people get away from danger. And Lenny lost his life, and he's one of those heroes, and that's why I have his initials on my arm. But it was amazing.